Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! I can feel her mind inside of me!
What the hell are you doing? Welcome to episode 78 of Nerdery and Murdery. Oh, I'm lost here.
Big 78. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murdery. Welcome to another week of the high jinks and the low jinks and the whatever the hell Zig was doing there at the beginning. Doesn't give me any clue onto what he's talking about, but I will let him go ahead and take over on the nerdery side of the house so I can figure out what the hell is going on around here.
Yay! I'm going to open with a quote by the science fiction author David Brin, and maybe this will give you some insight. Cyberpunk is the finest free promotion campaign ever waged on behalf of science fiction. It may not have attracted the real punks, but it did ensnare many new readers, and it provided the sort of movement that postmodern literary critics found alluring. Cyberpunk made science fiction more attractive to academics. In addition, it made science fiction more profitable to Hollywood and to the visual arts generally. Although the self-important rhetoric and whines of persecution on the part of cyberpunk fans were irrational at worst and humorous at best, Brin declares that rebels did shake things up. We owe them a debt. Today we are talking about the science fiction genre of cyberpunk.
Awesome.
So, for our listeners out there, Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction in a dystopian, futuristic setting that tends to focus on a combination of low life and high tech. It features futuristic technological and scientific achievements such as artificial intelligence and cybernetics, juxtaposed with a social collapsing dystopia or a decay.
And we've gone into some cyberpunk before because we talked about the RPG Shadowrun.
Yes, Shadowrun is definitely a cyberpunk point, as well as the film we discussed, Hardware, one of those independent films, is definitely a cyberpunk film. But since we discussed that, I didn't kind of key off on that one. I'm keying off on three specific things today. After a general discussion of cyberpunk, that is the film Akira, which is where that line is from, the book Neuromancer, sorry, and the role-playing game Cyberpunk.
And yes, because Necromancer is an entirely different book.
yes. But the way William Gibson got the idea from Necromancer for the word Neuromancer.
Did he really?
Yeah.
I thought that Necromancer came out after Neuromancer.
No. Necromancer was around before.
Huh.
Neuromancer came out in the mid to late 80s.
All right.
I'm sorry. Released in 1984. I'm looking at the note. So much of cyberpunk is rooted in the new wave of science fiction movement of the 1960s and the 1970s. Writers like Philip K. Dick, Michael Moorcock, Roger Zelazny, John Brunner, J.G. Ballard, Philip Jose Farmer, and Harlan Ellison. Examining the impact of drug culture, technology, and the sexual revolution while avoiding the utopian tendencies of earlier science fiction. Fahrenheit 451 and Brave New World also kind of gave a boost to cyberpunk as well. But comics exploring cyberpunk themes began appearing as early as Judge Dredd, which is definitely cyberpunk, published in 1977. But released in 1984, William Gibson's influential debut novel, Neuromancer, helped solidify cyberpunk as a genre, drawing influences from punk subculture and early hacker culture. Other influential cyberpunk writers include Bruce Sterling and Rudy Rucker. The Japanese cyberpunk subgenre began in 1982 with the debut of Katsuhiro Otomo's manga series Akira, with its 1988 anime film adaptation, also directed by Otomo, later popularizing the subgenre. Early films in the genre include Ridley Scott's 1982 film Blade Runner, one of several Philip K. Dick's works that have been adapted into films. In this case, it was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which we have also spoken about. The first cyberpunk television series was the TV series Max Headroom from 1987, playing in a futuristic dystopia ruled by an oligarchy of television networks, and where computer hacking played a central role in many storylines. The films Johnny Mnemonic, New Rose Hotel, both based upon short stories by William Gibson, flopped commercially and critically, while the Matrix trilogy and Judge Dredd were some of the most successful cyberpunk films. Newer cyberpunk media includes Blade Runner 2049, a sequel to the 1982 film, Dredd, which is not a sequel to the original movie, Upgrade in 2018, Alita Battle Angel in 2019, based on the 1990s Japanese manga, Battle Angel Alita, which we know as Honto Warrior, because the Japanese version of that film Don had, and we used to watch it over at his house.
I don't know. That's a know it as, but
Honto Warrior. And the Netflix TV series Altered Carbon,
which was great.
Yeah. But it was based on Richard K. Morgan's 2002 novel of the same name, and the 2020 remake of the 1997 role-playing video game Final Fantasy VIII, and the video game Cyberpunk 2077, based on R. Talsorian's game 1988 tabletop role-playing game Cyberpunk, which we will be discussing.
And I've heard that video game is just chock full of bugs.
Yeah, it's real buggy, which is really bad at being a cyberpunk game.
Right.
It really should be pretty clean, unless it's supposed to be buggy, in which case there should be ways to fix it. Cyberpunk plots often center on conflict among artificial intelligence, hackers, and megacorporations, and tend to be set in the near future Earth, rather than in the far future settings of galactic vistas found in novels such as Isaac Asimov's Foundation or Frank Herbert's Dune. They're not set 10,000 years in the future. They're set 20 minutes into the future, which was the tagline for Max Headroom. Settings are usually post-industrial dystopias, but tend to feature extraordinary cultural ferments that use the use of technology in ways never anticipated by its original inventors. Much of the genre's atmosphere echoes film de noir, and written works in this genre often use techniques from detective fiction. So there's a lot of detective stuff going on in Cyberpunk. Samuel Delaney's novel Nova is also considered one of the major forerunners of the cyberpunk movement. So getting to that, I want to talk about 3 distinct features of cyberpunk, sort of the ground rules for the genre itself. So we're going to start with Neuromancer. It is a 1984 science fiction novel by American-Canadian writer William Gibson, considered one of the earliest and best-known works in the cyberpunk genre. It is the only novel to win the Nebula Award, the Philip K. Dick Award, and the Hugo Award. It was Gibson's debut novel. That was his first book out the gate. It was the beginning of the Sprawl trilogy. Set in the future, the novel follows Henry Case, a washed-up hacker hired for one last job, which brings him in contact with a powerful artificial intelligence. Now, I will say this. Personally, I did not like Neuromancer.
I did.
I like them. One of the features in the Sprawl trilogy is called Mona Lisa Overdrive. I think it's the second or the third. I don't remember. I loved Mona Lisa Overdrive. But I did not like Neuromancer just because it was a little dry. And I think that's because I read it when I was like 17. And, I hadn't quite learned how to hone my ADHD as much as I have now. So I think I really ought to give this another try. Henry Dorset Case is a low-level hustler in the dystopian underworld of Chiba City. Once a talented computer hacker and console cowboy, Case was caught stealing from his employer, and as punishment, Case's central nervous system was damaged, leaving him unable to access the virtual reality datasphere called the Matrix. Case is approached by Molly Millions, an augmented razor girl and mercenary, on behalf of a shadowy U.S. ex-military officer named Armitage, who offers to cure Case for his services as a hacker. Case agrees, and his nervous system is repaired, though sacks of poison are placed in his blood vessels. If Case completes the job, Armitage will have the sacks removed. If not, they will burst and cripple him again. Armitage has Case and Molly steal a ROM module that contains the saved consciousness of one of the Case's mentors, legendary cyber cowboy McCoy Polly. Case and Molly discover Armitage's former identity as Colonel Willis Corto. Corto was a member of the Operation Screaming Fist, meant to disrupt Soviet computer systems. As his team attacked a Soviet computer center, EMP weapons were shut down their flight systems. He and a few survivors escaped over the Finnish border, but their helicopter was shot down, killing everyone except for Corto. After months in a hospital, Corto was visited by a U.S. government official who returned him to the United States to receive psychotherapy and reconstructive surgery. After providing what he came to realize was false testimony, misleading the public and protecting corrupt military officials, Corto snapped, killing the official who contacted him and disappearing into the criminal underworld, becoming Armitage. In Istanbul, the team recruits Peter Rivera, a sociopathic thief and drug addict. The trail leads Case to Wintermule, an artificial intelligence created by the Tessier Ashpool family. They spend their time in cryonic preservations at Freeside, a cylindrical space habitat which functions as a Las Vegas-style space resort to the wealthy. Why does Cyberpunk keep doing that? Have you ever noticed that? There's always some sort of orbital in space, which is really nice that the rich people live on, like the Zurich orbital in Shadowrun.
Sure, yeah. It's a theme.
Yeah, yeah, it is definitely part of the theme. It's one of those things I never really understood why they kept doing that, but everybody seems to do it, and well, at least it's
Well,
interesting.
it makes sense. You've got the ultra elite and the rich, and so why not give them a suborbital where they can, continue on their extravagant lifestyles? It makes sense.
Yeah. Um. So Armitage's personality starts to revert to the Corto personality as he relives the screaming fist. It is revealed that Wintermule has originally contacted Corto through a computer during his psychotherapy, creating the Armitage persona. And as Corto breaks through, he is uncontrollable, and Wintermule ejects him into space. Rivera meets Lady 3 Jane and tries to stop the mission, helping Lady 3 Jane and Hideo, her ninja bodyguard, capture Molly. Under orders from Wintermule, Case tracks Molly down. Neuromancer traps Case within a simulated reality after he enters cyberspace, and he finds the consciousness of Linda Lee, his girlfriend from Chiba City, who was murdered by one of his underworld contacts. He also meets Neuromancer, who takes the form of a young boy. Neuromancer tries to convince Case to remain in the virtual world with Linda, but Case refuses. Eventually Molly leaves Case to find a new girlfriend and resume his hacking work. Wintermule and Neuromancer contact him, claiming it has become the sum total of the works or the whole show and is looking for others like itself. Scanning records, transmissions, the super AI finds a transmission from the Alpha Centauri star system. So yeah, and then of course Case comes back in future iterations. But yeah, I don't want to give away too much of the plot because people may want to go out and read
I
it.
think you already have.
Yeah, this book is, this idea is brilliant. Again,
Yes.
I was not a big fan of this book back in, when I read it, like 1988, 1989, kind of there. But it's fascinating. And again, I'm a much bigger fan of Mona Lisa Overdrive, and it may be just because I like the title better. It gripped me a little more. But I definitely want to get back and try this. You've read it.
Mm-hmm. I love this book.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it sums up the cyberpunk genre pretty well.
Yeah.
So definitely want to have the fans get out there and at least check it out. Read a couple of chapters, see what you think. I will say it starts slow. When you agree, it kind of starts
Oh,
out a little
sure.
slow.
Like a lot of science fiction, it starts very slow, and you've really got to stick with it, because if you stick
Yeah.
with it, it's a very good book.
Yeah, and I think that's part of my problem. I didn't break that 100 pages, and I think if I'd have broken that 100-page barrier, it probably would have been right up my alley. The next piece of Cyberpunk that I want to talk about is Cyberpunk, the role-playing game. It's a tabletop role-playing game in the dystopian science fiction genre, written by Michael Pondsmith and first published by R. Talisarian Games in 1988. It is typically referred to by its second or fourth edition name, Cyberpunk 2022 and Cyberpunk Red, in order to distinguish it from the cyberpunk genre after which it is named. Cyberpunk exists within its own fictional timeline, which splits from the real world in 1990. The timeline has been extended with each major edition of the game. The first edition is set in 2013 to Cyberpunk Red, which is set in 2045. The backstory begins with the USA becoming embroiled in a major conflict in Central America in the 1980s, causing a significant economic collapse, ending in a military coup resulting in the European common market and Japan as superpowers and the Soviet Union not collapsing. This is coupled with the development of orbital habitats that become independent states and the rise of megacorporations that fight amongst themselves for dominance. Other disasters have included food blights causing disastrous famines, and by the late 1990s, the Middle East is a radioactive desert and a nuclear conflict. Bioengineering against a backdrop of warfare has resulted in the rapid development of cybernetic prosthetics and direct human-machine interface. With the lack of government and police due to the Central American wars and economic situation, casual violence is endemic. Many also suffer from technoshock and an inability to cope with a world of synthetic muscle tissue, organic circuits, and designer drugs. The main location for Cyberpunk is the fictional Night City, situated on the west coast of the United States. between Los Angeles and San Francisco with a population of 5 million people. It presents a stratified society of gang warfare, corporate rivalries, and political machinations in which the players have to survive. The rules of Cyberpunk are built on the R. Talisaurian's interlock system, a core game mechanic in the concept of difficulty values, used to gauge whether a player succeeds or fails at any given task. A player takes the value of their most appropriate character attributes, adds the value of any relevant skills or modifiers, and then finally adds the value of a 10-sided die roll in order to succeed. They must beat the difficulty value assigned to the task by the GM. Cyberpunk was one of the first tabletop games to use this concept. So have you ever played Cyberpunk before?
No, just Shadowrun.
I've played it once. It plays a lot like Shadowrun.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, you're using D10s instead of D6s.
Right.
But as a Cyberpunk, the player, in character generation, as Cyberpunk, the player embraces body modification, cyber technology, and bioengineering, again, much like Shadowrun. They live by 4 tenets: style over substance, attitude is everything, always take it to the edge, and break the rules. There are 10 key roles, each with their own specific abilities. These include charismatic musicians, rocker boys, bodyguards and assassins, solos, computer hackers, net runners, road warriors, nomads, street experts, fixers, investigative journalists and reporters, medias, mechanics, techs or techies, doctors, med techs, corporate executives and police officers, on a choice of, and they're just called corporate executives or police officers. I think actually they're called police and execs.
Mm-hmm.
A choice of rules are provided for character creation, either by assigning points to purchase skills or by rolling D10s for more random outcomes. A system called Life Path is provided to develop each character further by generating goals, motivations, and events from the past. Finally, they gain money, cyberware, weapons, and other equipment, including fashion and lifestyle goods. Further character development is skill-based rather than level-based. For a successful play, players are awarded points to be spent on improving their character's skill set. So yeah, just like Shadowrun. You can either, except Shadowrun doesn't account for rolling. It's a point system. You can also use a thing, what would we call that? Sodas?
Mm-hmm. SOTA, soda.
Yeah, soda and character generation, which kind of helps flesh your character out. The game system is called Friday Night Firefight for combat. It emphasizes lethality, unlike other role-playing systems where characters amass higher hit points as they progress, allowing them to survive higher amounts of combat damage. The amount of damage a character can sustain in Cyberpunk does not generally increase as the character develops. Let that sink in with our listeners. So your hit points do not go up. You just have to get better and better at avoiding getting hit.
Right.
Each round, characters are permitted to take one move action and one other action. There are rules governing the use of auto fire, armor, and cover, including specific instructions for using people as shields. Alternative ammunition types for weapons are available. For example, a shotgun can be fired with buckshot instead of slugs. And character skills can be used to improve both ranged and melee combat. Additionally, there are rules covering other forms of damage such as drowning and asphyxiation, electrocution, and being set on fire. So yeah, there's a rule base in Cyberpunk for being set on fire. Net running. There are also rules for cybernetic hacking called net running, which characters jack in. They can interpret the net in several different ways, including classic Dungeons and Dragons maze, or perhaps as a star-filled galaxy. Netrunners engage in a virtual world with interface plugs, cyberdecks, and the interface special ability. Cyberdecks include slots to contain programs selected ahead of the time by netrunners to assist in tasks such as evasion, decryption, and detection. Combat and other action in the net are fast, taking place second by second as opposed to 3-second combat rounds in the physical world. The destruction of the global net in later editions of Cyberpunk turns the attention of netrunners to local private networks. The effect on gameplay is that net running is no longer a remote activity. Netrunners are embedded within their team with equipment such as virtual goggles, alternating their actions between both physical and virtual space. Closer integration with other activities was a game design choice to ensure all characters have a part in the play during a hacking scene. So, in Shadowrun, when you have a Decker, their combat is completely separate from everybody else's, and they're completely not usable in what everybody else is doing.
Right.
And like I said, I did know of a very large group where they had several hackers that worked on different missions. But the thing is, when they went into combat, they had two different GMs, right? The networking GM and the regular real world GM, right? And they would pass notes to each other, but they would go into two different rooms and do that. I think that is the only effective way to do that in Shadowrun.
Sure.
But apparently in Cyberpunk, they also came across that same problem and solved it by having it be going on simultaneously with the regular combat.
Mm-hmm.
So just flipping back and forth. So, I mean, that works too. Just like when you take a combat group, split it in half, one goes to the front, one goes to the back, you have to toggle back and forth. But it's not just one person holding up the rest of the party.
Right.
The acquisition of cyber weapons, and cyber optics, and other implants carries a humanity cost. Every 10 points of humanity cost causes the loss of an empathy point. The character's attributes that measure how well they relate to other people. An empathy level of 0 represents a complete loss of humanity, a state known as cyberpsychosis, which we also have in Shadowrun.
Oh, yes.
In the case of players, their characters become non-player characters controlled by the game master. So if you get cyberpsychosis in
wow.
Cyberpunk, then the GM just takes your character.
Wow.
Ouch! So the editions, the first version of Cyberpunk was published in 1988, again by R. Telesorian Games. The game components of the box set consist of 44-page handbook, a 38-page source book, and a 20-page combat book, 4 pages of game aids, and 2 10-sided dice. A number of rules supplements were subsequently published in 89. Rocker Boy, which is a source book for the Rocker Boy character. Solo of Fortune, Hardwired, Near Orbit Space Supplement. These editions of game retrospectively became known as Cyberpunk 2013. So that's basically it for the Cyberpunk role-playing game for my notes, other than this is something I've played once. I was comparing it to Cyberpunk or to Shadowrun. I think maybe negatively, because this game is a bit fun. I think it's something that we should try one of these days. If we ever get time.
I'd much rather play Shadowrun.
But it's definitely interesting, and the source material is fascinating, and it is something that you might even be able to incorporate into a Shadowrun game.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these ideas. I love the idea of the cyber. You get so much cyber psychosis that the GM just takes your character.
That's hysterical.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's hysterical.
Ouch. Brain don't need blood. Brain just needs to stay wet. The final piece I wanted to talk about in Cyberpunk as a genre is Akira. Akira is now widely regarded as one of the greatest animated films of all time, and prompted an increase in popularity of anime movies in the US and generally outside of Japan. It's still admired for its exceptional visuals. In BBC Channel 4's 2005 poll of the 100 greatest animations of all time, featuring both film and television, Akira came in at number 16. It showed again on Empire's list of the top 100 best films of world cinema, coming in at number 51. IGN also named it the 14th on its list of top 25 animated movies of all time, and the Akira anime also made Time Magazine's list of top 5 anime. DVDs, the film made a number of 16 on Time Out's top 50 animated movies list, and a number 5 the total film's top 50 animated films list. The film was ranked number 1 by Wizards Anime Magazine, and top 50 anime released in North America list in 2001. It was ranked number 4 on the Hollywood Reporter's Critics Tale. You know what? I have just a bunch of lists of how this is a great movie. Let's just talk about it. Akira is considered a landmark film in the cyberpunk genre, particularly the Japanese cyberpunk subgenre. The British Film Institute described Akira as a vital cornerstone of the cyberpunk genre, along with Blade Runner and Neuromancer. Rob Garrett of South China Morning Post called Akira one of the most influential sci-fi visions ever realized on film. Compared to the influence of Blade Runner, Akira is not credited as a breakthrough for adult animation, or is now credited as a breakthrough for adult animation, proving to global audiences that animation was not just for children. There's something in Akira called the Akira slide. It refers to a scene where Kaneda slides into view with his motorbike, and he uses a sideways slide to bring his bike to a halt while the bike gives off a trail of smoke and electrical sparks caused by this slide. It is regarded as one of the most iconic anime scenes of all time, widely imitated and referenced in many works of animation, film, and television. So anytime you ever see somebody pull a bike up to a stop sideways and there's smoke and sparks coming up, it's because of Akira. And they use it in everything. Batman the Animated Series, Gargoyles, Airmaster, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yakuza Japan, Super Robot Monkey Team, Hyperforce Go, Teen Titans, Gurren Lagann, Star Wars The Clone Wars, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Fresh Pretty Cure, Lupin 3 versus Detective Conan, Pokemon Diamonds and Pearls, Durara, Adventure Time, Clarence, Marvel Spider-Man, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and Nope. That is just a few examples of people using the Akira slide.
Wow.
Yeah. Akira is regarded by many critics as a landmark animated film, influenced much of the art in the anime world that followed, and released with many illustrators in the manga industry citing the film as an important influence. It's also influenced numerous works in animation, comics, film, music, television, and video games. Akira, it basically is the idea. Tokyo was destroyed like 40 years before the film takes place. There's a vast underworld that occurs where people are running around, trying to make a living, trying to make their way, much in a lot of cyberpunk, the low life, as it were. And there's this group of friends who aren't really a gang. They just hang out with each other and fight other kids and try to hustle to make it. Well, one of them stumbles upon the power of Akira. And what the power of Akira is the ability to make your mind do things that other minds can't, i.e. cause what is essentially an atomic explosion, which is what happened with the original Akira. You find out throughout the film that Akira, the power of Akira is actually, it was a small child who had these powers and lost control and basically obliterated Tokyo 40 years before. And it's one of our heroes fighting another one of our heroes who got the Akira power and can't control it. And almost decimates Tokyo again, or what they call Neo Tokyo or New Tokyo. That's Akira in a nutshell, but it's so much more. It's brilliant. It's dark. It's well drawn. I want to say well lit, but it's drawn. So the lighting in the anime is really good. I don't know how to put that, but yeah, the music's good. The scenes are good. Of course, you got the Akira slide, which everybody uses. It's like the John Woo opening the doors and the doves behind you. It's that, only with a motorcycle. So the 2020 Summer Olympics, in the 2013 bidding process, several commentators claimed that the Akira predicted the future event of the Olympics getting shut down and some cataclysm happening. And in truth, it actually did. We had to move them to 2021. But it was due to the coronavirus pandemic, not because, somebody had this weird mind power that destroyed a stadium.
Right.
But yeah, Akira is one of those films that's just, I think everybody in my household has at least one Akira t-shirt. It plays in my house. Everybody's seen it. everybody wants to scream, Tetsuo, Kaneda. It's just one of those things. But yeah, those are three tenets, I think, of Cyberpunk. If you can get into those three things, you will probably enjoy Cyberpunk. But there's many others as well that we talked about: Blade Runner, Hardware, Shadowrun, of course. It's just, as a genre, it's very, very interesting. It is dark. I would not call it a happy genre, but it is very, very interesting and really good storylines and ideas and thoughts and shades of gray. There are no good and bad guys in Cyberpunk. There are shades of gray. Because everybody's trying to make it in the world.
Sure.
And, it's beautiful. I love it. What do you think? What are your thoughts on Cyberpunk as a genre?
I love Cyberpunk as a genre. I mean, with Shadowrun being one of my favorite RPGs of all time,
Yes.
I'd have to love Cyberpunk. If I didn't, I wouldn't enjoy that game. So I mean, it's a favorite of mine, and I go back to, I read Neuromancer many, many years before I ever picked up a Shadowrun book or was ever even introduced into Shadowrun. So I love Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is great.
Yes, it is indeed great. And it's something that I think our listeners, if they haven't gotten into it, they should probably at least check some of it out.
Mm-hmm.
Akira is readily available on many, many different platforms. And again, you can pick up some of the Cyberpunk role-playing stuff in used bookstores. They're not very thick. You can grab a source book and just kind of read through it. Even if you don't play the game, it's interesting. And of course, Neuromancer, you can pick it up at a used bookstore. You can pick it up at a new bookstore. It's always in print. It's in a bunch of different languages. And again, some of the other things that we've talked about. But yeah, that's basically it. I just wanted to cover a science fiction genre this time. I thought it might be interesting,
mm-hmm.
And spread some talking.
No, very interesting. Very interesting. Great topic. Great subject. Great subject to talk about. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, sir.
All right. With that, then, I guess we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For my information for my story today, I got my information off Talk Murder with Me, True Crime Case Histories, and Wikipedia. And this is the story of Larry Gene Bell.
Larry Gene Bell.
Now, Larry Gene Bell ain't going to come into this story for a while, so just prepare.
Okay.
We start off on May 31st, 1985, where schools across the U.S. were finishing up for the summer. 16-year-old Sherry Smith of Lexington, South Carolina, had just completed her final year at Lexington High School. Following days were going to be busy, but Sherry was excited. Her graduation ceremony, where she would be singing the national anthem, was taking place on June 2nd. Then she and a group of friends were going to set off on a cruise to celebrate the end of their high school years and beginning of a new chapter. She was born on June 25th, 1967 to Hilda and Robert Smith in Columbia, South Carolina. She was the middle child. She had an older sister, Dawn, and a younger brother, Robert. Smiths were very...
Did Robert have crazy hair? I'm sorry.
That silence is intentional, by the way. Terrible. Oh...
Younger brother Robert, that's where you were.
I know where I was. Idiot. The Smiths were a tight-knit, loving family. They were highly regarded and influential in Lexington, where they were active in their church and community. Sherry had bouncy blonde curls, a rosy complexion, and bright blue eyes. She was bright, outgoing, and radiated positivity. Friends and family could always count on her to lift them up if they were ever feeling down. So she's a bright, happy girl.
Right on.
On that final day in May, Sherry had spent the afternoon at a pool party with her friends, and at 3:38 p.m., she arrived back at her home on Platte Springs Road in Lexington. They had a driveway which was about 200 meters long, which led up from the main road to the Smith home, and at the end of the driveway was the Smith's mailbox. Sherry's father, Robert, again glanced out of the window of his office and saw Sherry turning onto the driveway in her car, and he expected that she'd come through the door any minute, so he just went back to what he was doing. About 5 or 10 minutes later, however, he realized that he had not heard Sherry come in, so he looked out the window again, and he saw her car still sitting at the end of the driveway next to the mailbox. He thought this was very odd and wondered what was taking so long, and then he got the distinct feeling in his gut that something wasn't right. So he hopped in his car and went down to the end of the driveway. Once he arrived at the mailbox, it was clear that Robert was right to be concerned. There was Sherry's car, but no Sherry. The engine was still running, and the door was wide open, and on her passenger seat sat Sherry's purse. There were bare footprints leading from the driver's side door to the mailbox, but none coming back, and several pieces of mail lie on the ground next to the mailbox. As we said from the beginning, it was clear that Sherry would not have left on her own accord. She was content and happy in life. She loved her family, and she was excited for the summer ahead. Furthermore, she was diabetic and would not have gone anywhere without her medication.
Yeah. Well, and barefooted.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it looks like she got out of the driver's side door, went around to get the mail out the mailbox, presumably to grab the mail and take it up the block. But It looks like she was halted in that process.
Right. And investigators determined that she had gone from the car to the mailbox and that she was snatched by someone and dropped the mail in the process. Right away, investigators from the Lexington County Sheriff's Department organized a manhunt. At the time, it was the largest to take place in South Carolina history. But despite this, it didn't turn up any clues to Sherry's whereabouts. The Smith family were sick with worry and publicly pleading with Sherry's captor to let her go. Otherwise, all they could do was wait. Bob later recalled for the first time in his life, as the father and protector of his household, he was not in control. He was not in charge of his home. 2 days after Sherry disappeared, on the evening of June 2nd, the Smiths got a phone call from an unknown man who distorted his voice. He asked to speak to Sherry's mother, Hilda. He told her, quote, "Sherry is with me." The man described the black and yellow swimsuit Sherry had under her clothes to prove Hilda that the call was not some sort of prank. He told her that Sherry was doing well and they were watching TV together. And while he did not demand any money in exchange for Sherry's return, he did tell Hilda that they would be receiving a letter the following day. Detectives did trace the call and found it at a payphone 20 miles from the Smiths' home in Columbia, but time was not on their side. By the time they were able to pinpoint a more precise location and travel there, whoever made the call was now gone.
Mm-hmm.
Detectives arrived at the Lexington post office the following morning and began sorting through the mail, and sure enough, they found a letter addressed to the Smiths. The letter, which was 2 pages in length and written on paper from a yellow legal pad, was in Sherry's handwriting, and across the top she had written, quote, "Last will and testament." Several times throughout the letter, Sherry emphasized to her family how much she loved them, and she wrote that they should never let this ruin their lives. The most frightening was her request that she have a closed casket at her funeral. So Robert had accompanied detectives to the post office, and he was actually the first to read the letter. He was devastated, but refused to abandon hope that his daughter might come home. But what he dreaded most was telling Hilda what the letter said.
Oh, yeah.
Investigators sent the letter to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Crime Lab, and it was examined by a forensic document examiner for any clues, for example, fibers, fingerprints, handprints, or any discrepancies in the spelling and handwriting. Another call came through to the Smiths that afternoon, and the same distorted voice was on the other end. The man asked Hilda if they had received the mail, which they told him he had. He then asked if Hilda believed him. Hilda replied that she wasn't sure because she had not heard from Sherry and did not know whether she was really okay, but the man replied that she would know in 2 or 3 days. That evening, the Smiths received another call. This one was particularly ominous, as the man said to Hilda, quote, "Sherry is now part of me, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Our souls are now one." Sounds very Buffalo Bob to me.
Yeah.
Sherry's captor, whoever he was, appeared to be very much enjoying taunting the Smiths, which indicated he was a person who had never felt particularly in control of his life or what was going on around him. Having the Smiths at his mercy instilled in him a sort of power he had not felt before. He probably viewed his life as not working out as one would hope, and perhaps he was unhappy with his job or not where he wanted to be financially, and it's almost certain he didn't have any luck with women. He most likely suffered a series of rejections over time. The next day, the Smiths received another phone call, and this time Sherry's sister Dawn spoke with Sherry's captor. He told her that at 3:10 a.m. on Saturday, June 1st, Sherry wrote the letter. Then at 4:58 a.m., he said they became one soul. When Dawn asked what he meant for that, he told her not to ask questions. He said that Sheriff James Metz of the Lexington County Sheriff's Department should stop searching for Sherry, and in the background, Hilda pleaded with him for not to kill her daughter. He said, Sherry loves and misses y'all, so you should just get a good night and rest. Really? On June 5th, around noon, he called the Smiths again, and he told Hilda to listen carefully and proceeded to give detailed directions to a specific location. And they ended the call saying, quote, "We're waiting. God chose us." Detectives followed the directions he provided, and Hilda begged to go along, but they convinced her it would not be a good idea. And what they found confirmed everybody's worst fears. Sherry's body was exactly where the man said it would be, behind an old Masonic lodge in Saluda County, 18 miles west of the Smiths' home. The autopsy showed that Sherry had been dead for about 4 days, and in fact, the medical examiner estimated she had been killed about 12 hours after being kidnapped. They were unable to determine her cause of death, but a residue of duct tape on Sherry's face suggested she had died of suffocation. Pieces of her hair had been cut off because the tape had gotten stuck in it. This indicated to detectives that whoever killed Sherry knew what he was doing, as any clues he left on the body might lead to him. For example, any fingerprints that might have ended up on the duct tape. And due to the extended period of time Sherry's body spent in the elements, no forensics evidence was recovered. They could not definitively prove whether or not Sherry had been sexually assaulted. When the man said on the phone that Sherry and he had become one soul on June 1st at 4:58 a.m., detectives assumed this was the time that he killed her. FBI agents John Douglas and Ron Walker of the Behavioral Science Unit came up with a detailed profile of Sherry's killer. They categorized him as an organized killer, that he was sophisticated in his methods and been planning the murder for a while. It's possible that he committed sex crimes or crimes of similar nature before. According to their profile, he would be young, in his mid to late 20s or early 30s, white, homely, and overweight. He had likely been married but was now divorced or separated. He was of above average intelligence with a knowledge of electronics, given that he had altered his voice from the phone calls. And he was not impulsive or one to take chances. From listening to recordings of the phone calls, the FBI agents and detectives working the case were convinced that he was reading from a script that he had written. The giveaway was that he sometimes stumbled and would go back to the beginning of a sentence or start over, saying the exact same phrase again. Careful examination of the evidence led Douglas and Walker to the conclusion that this was not a one-off for Sherry's killer, and in all likelihood he would kill again if not captured. He was drunk on the feelings of power and control that manipulating Sherry's family gave him. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he yearned for these feelings to continue. Even after Sherry's body was found, her killer was not done rubbing salt in the wounds of the family of the Smith family. He particularly enjoyed speaking to Dawn on the phone, and on June 6th he called the Smith home again. Dawn answered, and he told her that he was planning to turn himself in the next day, but was contemplating killing himself instead, and then he asked for forgiveness. Sometimes he would mix up Dawn and Sherry. He accidentally said that he had gotten out of hand and all he wanted to do was make love to Dawn, and when Dawn questioned this, he corrected himself, saying he meant Sherry. Obviously aware of the date of Sherry's funeral, he chose that evening to make his next call to the Smiths. And once again, he spoke to Dawn and chose this time to be particularly cruel. He described to Dawn the details of Sherry's death, including the various disgusting ways he sexually assaulted her. He explained to Dawn that he had let Sherry make her own decisions regarding her death, as if somehow that justified his actions. For example, he, quote, let her choose what time she would die. He also gave her the choice of dying by shooting, a drug overdose, or suffocation, and she chose the last option, according to what he told Dawn. So he wrapped duct tape around her head, and she died right there in front of him. He said, quote, God was ready to accept her as an angel. The phone call stopped after that. 2 weeks after Sherry was kidnapped from outside of her home, the killer struck again, just as the FBI were sure he would. This time he snatched 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick from her front yard in nearby Richland County, which was 24 miles from the Smiths' home. It was in broad daylight, and like Sherry, Deborah was pretty, blonde, and blue-eyed. She had been playing outside with her younger siblings, and her father was inside the house. And just like Sherry, Deborah was there 1 second and gone the next, and it had been 8 days since the last phone call to the Smiths. Detectives needed him to get in contact again, so FBI agents Douglas and Walker came up with a plan. Whoever killed Sherry and kidnapped Deborah loved attention, and as I mentioned earlier, he was likely above average intelligence, so no doubt that he believed he was smarter than detectives on the case. The agents thought they might be able to lure him out of hiding with a memorial service for Sherry at the cemetery, with Dawn playing a central role, given that he was obviously very fond of her. He would be paying close attention to the media, carefully consuming every story related to Sherry and Deborah, all the while patting himself on the back for having evaded capture. If the local media made a big enough story out of the memorial service, there was a good chance that he would attend, stand in the back, and silently gloat. The media coverage of the memorial was just what the agents had hoped for. Members of the community came far and wide to support the Smiths, and at the instructions of Agent Douglas, Dawn brought a small stuffed koala bear, which was Sherry's favorite animal, to lay at her sister's grave, along with a bouquet of flowers. If Sherry's killer did attend a service, he would see Dawn with the bear, and with any luck, he might return after the service finished to take the bear as a souvenir. So detectives stood out of sight, taking down the license plates of all vehicles that attended the service, and once it was finished, they hid, lying in wait for their suspect to appear and take the bear, but he never did. Just after midnight on June 23rd, the Smiths got another call. While Sherry's killer had not been brought out in the open by the memorial service, it clearly awoke something in him. No doubt he wanted to go to the service, but did not feel it was safe. Instead, he satisfied his need for attention by calling the Smiths again. Again, Dawn answered the phone. Of course, she never wanted to speak with him, but keeping him on the line was vital in tracking down who killed her sister. As he had a number of times before, he brought God into the conversation. He found playing God to be particularly satisfying. Maybe citing God in his phone calls made him feel less guilty, but it's more likely that he knew the Smiths were dedicated Christians, and he derived pleasure from bringing God into his taunts. Further indication that he was beginning to feel untouchable was the fact he no longer distorted his voice for his phone calls to the Smiths. And the first thing he said to Dawn was particularly alarming. He said, quote, "God wants you to join Sherry Faye. It was only a matter of time, and she could not be protected forever." He then changed the subject to what he really wanted to talk to Dawn about, and he asked her if he had heard of Deborah May Helmick. At first, she didn't recall, but then she remembered a young girl being abducted in Richland County. And the man on the phone said, "Listen carefully," and then he rattled us off a series of directions, just as he had 2 weeks on the phone to Hilda, and where he gave directions to Sherry's body. He ended the call saying, quote, "Deborah May is waiting. God forgive us all." It was, of course, like deja vu to the detectives, and they followed the directions they had been given, and knowing what they would find when they reached the destination filled them with dread. Sure enough, off a dirt road amongst thick brush lay the body of Deborah May Helmick.
9 years old.
Mm-hmm. As was covered in the FBI profile, he was above average intelligence, and he knew not to leave any evidence on the bodies that could be traced back to him. His fun, however, was about to come to an end thanks to a piece of evidence he had practically placed directly in the hands of the detectives, which was Sherry's last will and testament letter. Given that the letter was written on a paper from a legal pad and not just loose paper, there was a good chance that the killer had written on previous sheets from the pad and could have left indentions on the sheets before Sherry wrote her letter. So forensics document examiner Mickey Dawson used an electrostatic detection apparatus on the letter to detect any sort of these indentions, and what he found was pretty incredible. The machine detected a list of names and telephone numbers, and it appeared that it was a call in case of emergency list.
Oh. Huh.
One of the phone numbers was nearly complete. It was only missing the final digit. It began It began with 205, which showed as an Alabama number. The next three digits, 837, was the exchange for Huntsville. So that left only 9 possibilities for what the 10th digits could be. 10th digits and on.
Yeah.
So they tested the phone number with the 9 different options for the 10th digit until someone picked up, and it was a young man who answered the phone, and detectives asked him if he had any connections to South Carolina. He told them yes, his parents lived there. The young man's father was Ella Shepard, who lived just 15 miles from the Smith home. Ella Shepard had no clue how he could be of help to detectives, but he had agreed to speak with them anyway, and he told them he'd been on vacation with his wife when Sherry Smith had disappeared. Then they played the Shepards a recording of the killer's later phone calls where the voice was not distorted, and immediately Shepard was able to identify the voice. He said, "That's Larry Gene Bell." Larry Gene Bell had been house sitting while they were on vacation, and on examination of the Shepards' phone records from when they were away, detectives discovered that some of the calls to the Smiths after Sherry's kidnapping were made from the Shepards' home. Shepard explained that he had left the list of phone numbers for Bell while they were away, and the list included the number of his son who lived in Alabama, which is the number they, of course, called. Little information is available on Larry Gene Bell's childhood. He was born in Ralph, Alabama on October 30th, 1949, and was one of 5 children. The Bell family never settled in one place for long, moving between Alabama, South Carolina, and Mississippi. Bell graduated from high school in Mississippi and went to trade school to become an electrician. And when his training was finished, he moved to Columbia, South Carolina, where he got married and had 1 son. Again, the FBI is nailing this right on.
Yeah, they have nailed him all the way up one side and down the other.
Fascinates me that they can do that.
Well, I mean, it's the Mindhunter guys, that figured that out.
Yes, exactly. In 1970, Bell joined the Marines, but he was there for less than a year and be discharged after accidentally shooting himself in the knee while cleaning a gun. After his stint in the Marines, he worked for a brief period at the Department of Corrections in Columbia. And in 72, he moved his family to Rock Hill, South Carolina. And in 76, he and his wife divorced, which I guess the wife got full custody of the son at that point.
Yeah. Well, I noticed too, a Marine correctional officer, he's seeking out positions of power.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. Ella Shepard did say when Bell picked him and his wife up from the airport after their vacation, he was not himself. They said he seemed nervous and on edge, and he had not shaved and lost weight, and all he wanted to do was talk about the missing Smith girl. They thought Bell was a textbook example of a killer beginning to lose his cool. The behaviors he was exhibiting were precisely what behavioral analysis looked for when trying to track down a killer. Sheriff Metz would later discuss the application of behavioral analysis in his case. Research in the field was in its early stages at this time, but John Douglas, as well as other agents from the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, worked on the case with him. The only part that they were slightly off on was his age. Bell was slightly older than the agents thought he was. He was 35 when they guessed he would be in his late 20s or early 30s.
Early
close.
30s. Yeah, that's pretty close.
It's close.
Yeah.
They were correct that he was white and slightly overweight, that he was divorced, he was intelligent, and had good knowledge of electronics. Bell's past also included sexually motivated crimes. He had been caught harassing women over the phone before, making threats of a sexual nature. He also attempted to kidnap a female from the University of South Carolina, but failed. On June 27, 1985, 28 days after the kidnapping and murdering of Sherry Smith, Bell was arrested. Police found further evidence in the Shepard home, which incriminated Bell, which were 6 long blonde hairs that were almost definitely Sherry's. I didn't see if they were forensically tested, but they did say that they were microscopically similar to her hair.
Okay.
Hair forensics is a little hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a sheet of it's usually a sheath of dead skin over another sheath.
Right.
So, and they're different colors usually.
All they knew is that the hair didn't belong to Mrs. Shepard or anybody that the Shepards knew. Bell initially denied having anything to do with the kidnapping and deaths of Sherry and Deborah, but rather than just outright denied, he claimed it was the bad Larry Gene Bell who was guilty of the murders.
Oh, my God.
In February of '86, Bell went to trial for the murder of Sherry Smith. He made a scene during his 6-hour-long testimony, yelling and making bizarre comments such as, "Mona Lisa is a man and silence is golden, my friend." The jury deliberated for just 47 minutes, and they returned verdicts of guilty on both charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder in the case of Sherry Smith, and Bell was sentenced to death.
46 minutes. Wow. So they went, yeah, guilty. And then they made their lunch order.
He did get tried separately in '87 for the kidnapping and murder of Deborah Helmick, and in that the jury came back with the same verdict, guilty on both counts. It was not only Sherry and Deborah's family and friends who were shaken by the heinous acts of Larry Gene Bell. The entire state of South Carolina was on edge from the time Sherry was kidnapped to the day Bell was arrested. Worried parents were wary of letting their children play outside and without adult supervision. Teen girls were fear-stricken, and for good reason. They traveled in groups, no matter how short the distance. To walk alone for even the shortest time was not worth the risk.
Yeah, homegirl was at the end of her driveway.
Yeah.
And the other girl was in her front yard.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Even after Bell was arrested, the fear never completely lifted. The scars he inflicted on the community Sherry and Deborah left behind, though faded, still remain to this day. Bell was given a choice of being executed by lethal injection or the electric chair, and he ultimately chose the chair. There were no reports of Bell being a violent prisoner, but I doubt that his loud and frequent declarations that he made that he was the son of God made him any friends while he was in prison.
Nope.
On October 4th, 1996, after 10 years on death row, 46-year-old Bell died silently in South Carolina's electric chair. He had no parting words as he left this world behind. Bell to this day does remain a suspect in the cases of two women, 26-year-old Sandy Elaine Cornett and 21-year-old Denise Newsom Porch. Both women disappeared from Charlotte, North Carolina. Sandy was engaged to a co-worker of Bell's, and apparently Bell had attended a party at her apartment before, and she was last seen in November of 1984. Denise managed the Yorktown Apartments, where she also lived, on Tavola Road in Charlotte, and the last time anybody saw her when she was showing a man around the Yorktown Apartments on July 31st, 1975. She had left her husband a note letting him know what she was doing, and despite an extensive search, Denise was never seen again, and she was legally declared dead in 1982. Bell became a suspect in Denise's disappearance after he was convicted of the murders of Sherry Smith and Deborah Helmick. And as it turned out, Bell had been living just 300 yards from the Yorktown Apartments when Denise disappeared in 1975.
Oh, wow.
And that is the story of Larry Gene Bell.
Well, I hope that they were able to study this guy quite a bit so we can stop making more of these.
Yeah, I don't know how much they studied him. They really didn't say on that. All it really got is that he spent 10 years on death row and then was electrocuted.
Yeah. Then rode the lightning, as it were.
Yep. So thank you for taking that trip with me.
Well, thank you, sir. That was fascinating, and also fascinating on how they were able to just come up with who that guy was. I mean,
oh, I know that bewilders me how they can just nail it like that.
I'm telling you, man, those Mindhunter guys are brilliant.
Yes, we've talked about them several times before, and it's just
maybe we should do something on those guys. You know, well, that team.
Yeah, maybe so. That's something to think about. Well, cool. We appreciate you joining us for this week. As always, you can find our information on nerderymurdery.com. You can find our contact information. So if you wish to contact us, let us know things you want to hear, things you don't want to hear, or just let us know things in general. Please do feel free to reach out and contact us. We
also have a YouTube page where you can see videos of some of the things we're talking about. In some cases, full videos. As long as they'll let us. But in the just go to Nerdery Murdery in a new YouTube search, and it'll pull them up.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
You can also find the link to our merchandise, where if you wish to show off your Nerdery Murdery fandom, please do consider getting something there. And you can find the link to our Patreon. So if you wish to donate to this show, help keep our show going, you do get exclusive episodes as well as episodes early. For all of our patrons, we do put information about our exclusive on our website, but the episode itself is exclusive to our patrons.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And lastly, please do remember to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us and helps others find our content so that other people can enjoy it, just like you faithful listeners out there. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Thank you guys so much.
So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Geoffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.